Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about 5 races in Total War Warhammer 3 that are in dire need for a rework. And when I say rework, I'm not just talking here about races that, oh, they need some improvements here and there. No, they need major overhauls in their campaigns to actually make them work properly. Because right now, their campaigns can feel pretty miserable in one way or another, or in multiple ways, really, when it comes down to it. Of course, not going to be talking about the Demons of Chaos. I think the Demons of Chaos would be at the top of any list of this kind of nature, but I've just decided, you know what, I'm not going to talk about demons anymore.
So the worst but the demons are here. You really are forgetting something, aren't you?
No, Carl. He isn't forgetting anything. He's just tired of dealing with all the obnoxious know-it-alls that show up like a fetid plague in every comment section of his videos every time he mentions the demons. Because they wish to let him know how wrong he is about Ankari and Skarbrand, and shouldn't judge them all with the same brush. The special kind are those that proclaim he doesn't know what he's talking about because he lacks experience with the game, while he's working as a full-time content creator for said game for months.
I hate to agree with a madman, especially a mad vampire at that, but you are right. Dealing with the YouTube comment section makes you want to take a flamethrower to the damn thing. Maybe they should subscribe and like the video as opposed to their rancid comments. Also supporting the channel via Patreon or PayPal if they want to help.
Now, the first race to start with here is actually one that I didn't include in the poll, but because quite a few people actually left messages referring to this race, and after thinking about it a bit, I did decide to include it as opposed to the Vampire Coast. Now, I feel the Vampire Coast doesn't have a lot of issues, but so does Norsca. So on the surface level, Norsca does seem like a pretty decent race. Yes, they do have units with low armor, so that's going to be a bit of a pain in auto-resolve, but they do have, or a major pain in auto-resolve rather, but they do have significant benefits as in actual battle, like Berserkers, Champions, and when you get into the Trolls, there's quite a bit of potential for Norsca. But here's the issues though. And not just issues that could be changed with patches, right? Like their weak economy, you know, that is something Creative Assembly could always improve on. Or the fact that their campaigns are pretty bad when it comes down to it in a lot of ways. Because Norscans don't like each other, so you will end up fighting the other tribes. Now, that may not seem a problem, but because of the Norscan Confederation mechanic, you're quite likely to end up in a situation where you conquer all of Norsca very quickly, and then you have to expand from that while waging war on a lot of neighbors. Now, one of the problems with that during the course of a campaign is the fact that having to fight a lot of factions from the very start can make a campaign a living hell, because the more enemies you have, the weaker other factions will perceive you as being, so they'll pile on. And one of the things you want to do in a campaign, in most campaigns, is avoid having to do that. If you're playing a Norscan campaign, it's kind of something that's going to be very difficult to avoid. So that is something of an issue. But here are the things that really need a rework beyond just, you know, the campaigns themselves, their starting positions, all that. Like poor Wulfric, he just starts with a tier 1 settlement and absolutely nothing. How is that a campaign start? Compared to Trog even, who starts with like, yeah, he starts with a tier 2 minor settlement, but here's the thing about Trog compared to Wulfric. Trog's gonna gain very quickly control of a province with 4 regions in it, and he has a much more powerful starting army than Wulfric. I mean, how is that even comparable? But outside of those kind of issues between these two campaigns and the overall campaign situation, there's some other issues as well. Some major problems during the course of the campaign. First off, we have the gods, right? And you do need to please the Chaos Gods to gain allegiance with them. Now, gaining allegiance with them is really powerful. Upkeep, income from ports with all of the gods, casualty replenishment, unit experience, weapon strength, winds of magic, all that good stuff. So a lot of power if you do appease the gods, with some really great rewards at the highest possible level. All well and good. Here's the problem. The mechanic that you need to do, the mechanic in the game you need to follow in order to appease the gods sucks, because you don't have a great economy to begin with. And so what you want to do most of the time is actually sack settlements because you want the money from them. The problem with that is, in order to achieve a higher level of allegiance with the gods and thus gain the major benefits with them, you need to you need to raise a settlement. So you're always constantly balancing between sacking a settlement and raising a settlement, let alone, you know, just outright occupying a settlement. So you don't have to start from level 1 with it. You always have that annoying, frustrating, and horrible balancing act. So that's one of the major issues when you're playing as Norsca, because actually winning your campaign can feel like a living hell. Okay, that's one of the things to be said about this campaign, about the Norscan campaigns. And then there's the monster hunts. Now, the monster hunts could be fun, but they're using the old quest objective system. And the problem is that quest objective system has been broken from day one in Immortal Empires. The infamous example was with Tyrion's campaign, where he couldn't gain one of his most important items. I'm not sure why this glow sometimes happens here in the game. This mega glow, this nuclear glow, sometimes happens in the game. But one of his goals was to get the Phoenix Gate. The problem, for one of his major quest items, the problem was, if Alariel took the gate, you would lose out on that. Now that was fixed. Creative Assembly still needs to fix the situation of monster hunts. But even if they did that, I would still say the system needs rework, because having to go around the world doing annoying objectives just to then get the quest battle is not a fun experience, to be quite blunt about it. I mean, the rewards are worth it, but there's a reason, a really good reason, why Creative Assembly just abandoned that system outright. It was not a good system in Warhammer 1 and 2. And it should never be implemented again in the game, because it just doesn't work to have like very specific objectives. Like, oh, go raid this settlement, like Middenheim. Go raid this region, or target a particular race or something like that. It doesn't work because of how dynamic these campaigns can be. Like, even a broader objective, like for instance, let's say you get an objective where you are like told, oh, raid this race or take down this race. Even that can be a bit of an issue, because dependent on the campaign you're playing, and this is more of an issue in general in Warhammer Frame, but dependent on the campaign you're playing, you might not have one of those races next to you at all. So you have to go out of your way to do a really annoying, frustrating objective for some of these monster hunts. Even if they work properly, it's not just a question of bugs, is that even if they work properly, they will still be frustrating as hell. So the system needs to be reworked, the god system needs to be reworked, the way Norsca interacts with settlements, the way their campaign mechanics work, those need to be reworked. And then you also should talk about their unit roster and their campaign situation. All those things need to be changed. Like Norsca, I mean, between playing Norsca and playing the Warriors of Chaos, I'll choose playing the Warriors of Chaos any single day when it comes down to it. Yes, you're missing out on some of the fun monsters, but you get things like Bloodthirsters. Between Mammoths and Bloodthirsters, I'm thinking I'm going to go with the Bloodthirster. That's just me when it comes down to it. So you need to give people an incentive. There's no incentive right now when their campaign has a lot of broken stuff like that, that even if fixed wouldn't be too fun. The second race to talk about on this particular list are the Ogre Kingdoms. The poor ogres, a faction that wasn't especially great even in the Realms of Chaos, but now in Immortal Empires is probably one of the worst factions in the game. The problem for the ogres is that their baseline economy from settlements is pretty weak. Settlements can't be grown past the minor settlement level, and as a result of that, they are very limited in the units they can recruit and the benefits they can provide to you as a faction. And the main economic building from the settlements only give you up to 150 income. Yes, this can be increased through camps, who do give you a significant benefit to non-camp buildings faction-wide, and it does stack, absolutely, but at the same time, there is a significant limit on the ogres on the campaign map. And it's really those limits that the ogres have in their campaign that really ruin their campaign. So, to begin with, the ogres do rely heavily on camps. Without camps, you're basically nothing as an ogre. The first issue with the camps is that you don't even start with the ability to build one. You need to unlock it for research. That does take you 3 turns. Now, to get more, and that's just for one camp. To get a second camp, you need to spend 16 more turns to do so. And after that, you're looking at 38 turns in total to get the bigger tents upgrade, or you could ignore that and go for tribal gathering, which is 34, and then go for big migration, 52, and then eventually Sky Titans plateaus to get infinite camp limit when it comes down to it. Now, 70 turns, like looking at this though, you're looking at 2, 3, 4 camps until you get the ability to build infinitely. That means if you're playing out as ogres, unless you're counting, of course, like Reese's special skill, which gives you an extra camp. So 4 or 5 camps during the course of your campaign until you unlock that for the first 70 turns. That means you only have 5 proper provincial capitals, because that's what camps really are. They're provincial capitals for the ogres. They don't have them in settlements, they have them in the camps. That is an insane limitation on a campaign. Within 70 turns, as many races, even ones that are pretty weak, I can have a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen province capitals. And those provincial capitals, what they really mean is economic power. What they mean is hero capacity. That's the 2 main things, like economic power and hero capacity, as well as unit recruitment, high-end unit recruitment. I'll just give you guys some examples over here when it comes to a couple of campaigns that I've been playing. Like Lawfern, like look at all of Wolfwan. I have way more than 5 provincial capitals here. Itza. Even Korn. Yeah, even freaking Korn. I have more provincial capitals than what the ogres can unlock in 17 turns. And I'm gaining them a lot faster. A lot faster in these campaigns. I gain them a lot faster in these campaigns than ogres can do it for research. Therein lies the problem. The camp limitation is plainly fucking ridiculous. And it doesn't even end there, because camps themselves, they're settlements. But they're settlements which you can't properly defend, because you can't move an army in them. You can't put a lord to take over the camp tyrant situation. The camp tyrant doesn't have a skill line. You can't move the camp. And on top of that, the camps will grow a lot slower than you might think. They might have good growth, but they're going to be limited by how the surplus points work. So it's actually going to take you quite a substantial amount of time to grow these camps to be able to access any of the good units and to crucially increase your hero capacity, especially when we're thinking about fire bellies and when we're thinking about butchers. And by the way, butchers can be pretty damn important when it comes to a campaign, right? Having a caster lord, having those hero effects, pretty damn important when we're thinking about the butchers. So camps are really important for the ogres because of the circle of influence, the meat that circle of influence does provide you. It is very important to have camps, but you're hamstrung during the course of the campaign because of the way that Creative Assembly decided to do it. And because of that limitation, you're going to have a much weaker economy, so that means you're not going to be able to have a great deal of army variety. Even though ogres, when we look at their army roster, they have a lot of great units. Like, I would love to use man-eaters, crushers, Mornfag cavalry, artillery, iron blaster. I would love to actually get my hands on these ogre toys, but instead, when I'm playing an ogre campaign, with the exception of getting iron guts for greases or gorgers for scrag, I'm just basically using ogre bulls or ogre bulls with dual weapons or iron fist, because everything else is just way too expensive and I can't afford it. Well, saber tusks also work, but everything else is just too expensive out of reach. Like, just a baseline man-eater is 300 upkeep. That is not an affordable unit on the shoestring of an economy that the ogres have. And it's not like the ogres earn so much money from sacking settlements that they can make up for it, because they don't actually have like an insane sacking income benefit that like the Greenskins do, or the Vampire Coves do, or some other factions do. I mean, you can earn quite a bit of money from sacking settlements, but it's not going to compare to some factions that have significant benefits to that. It just doesn't work the same way in your campaign. So you're hamstrung by a weak economy, by limited recruitment, limited hero capacity. Those are the things that need to change. And also the contract systems completely sucks. The rewards are almost never worth it when it comes to the ogres. And the few times that the reward is worth it, you just have to go so far out of your way to go for it that you just don't end up doing it. So the ogres, really weak, especially early game, and they're really hamstrung by the way the current system works. The third faction I wish to talk about is, of course, the Empire. The Empire has many issues in their campaign, from their unit roster, their hero selections, their lord selections, as well as their campaigns. Let's actually start with that. For Karl, Franz, and Balthazar Gelt, they get to deal with the Electric Count system. And the Electric Count system is pretty busted. The reason it's pretty busted is because it presents limited diplomatic options. If you declare war on an Electric Count, you're going to suffer a loss of significant imperial authority. And it's really annoying dealing with the influence system, the fealty system, and the imperial authority system. You basically have to cheese it so that it becomes worthless and you don't have to deal with it anymore. How do you cheese it? Well, it's pretty simple. You either, let's say I buy, for instance, territory here from Averheim, or someone takes it over, and then I recapture it, and then I give it to Stirland, right? Well, if I do that, if a territory of one Electric Count ends up in the hands of another Electric Count, then an event will pop off. And if you force the faction to give it back to the original owner, to its rightful owner, you'll gain imperial authority. That's how you cheese it. It's a really stupid, pointless, worthless system that's supposed to represent the internal imperial politics, and it just ends up being falling flat on its face, as it currently is. You can flat out ignore it if you know how to cheese it. So that's the first thing. And that's one of the things that makes it suck. The second thing is what the system does is, because you need fealty in order to confederate the faction, what Creative Assembly decided to do in their infinite wisdom with this rework that came in Warhammer 2 was to prevent you from being able to get military alliances, defensive alliances, military alliances, or diplomatic confederation with factions. So your ability to take over the entire empire is going to be, it's going to be slowed down. Unless you just break the system, get a lot of imperial authority, and conquer like Nuln through military force. Just a couple of examples there, right? Just an example there. You can absolutely do that. You can absolutely break the system. So the system is pretty bad, and it just completely hampers the empire. Thing is, for as bad as the imperial authority system is, the systems that Marcus Wolfhard has to deal with, it's not necessarily that much better, because on one hand, he does get Hellstorm rocket batteries and artillery very quickly in his campaign, and without the need of recruitment building. But on the other hand, he occasionally has to face a full stack of Lizardmen. Not exactly a fun experience in his campaign. For Volkmar, he has to hunt down the Books of Nagash to get all of these items from the Electric Count, all of these items and the various benefits. Again, not a great situation, because the Books of Nagash and how to get them, that does suck in a campaign. That's an issue for the Tomb Kings, but it's also an issue Volkmar has to deal with. So the way the campaigns work and their unique mechanics, that just plainly sucks right now. On top of that, that's just the beginning of the issue though, with the Empire. On top of that, their regular lore choices are not really that great. They're more support roles than, you know, straight up duelists. Like, even the General of the Empire, who should be the toughest melee fighter out of all of them, and certainly has the strongest melee ability of all of them, even the General of the Empire just isn't going to be that great of a lord in a duel. Imperial captains aren't too great heroes either when it comes to a fight. Like, their skill line is pretty pathetic when it comes to it, right? Nothing special, nothing particularly interesting when we're dealing with that with these guys. So there's a lot of things lacking when it comes to Empire, when it comes to lords and heroes. Furthermore, units. Well, here's the problem with units. If you don't own any DLC, you'll only be able to recruit regular spearmen from a provincial capital. If you own the DLC, Marcus Wolfhard DLC, you can get archers. And having such a vital early game unit tied to DLC is actually a pretty substantial issue in any campaign, because without it, you're gonna suffer. But even with the DLC, it's not like your early game units are good. They're actually all pretty bad. They're cheap to recruit, very cheap to recruit, much cheaper than many other factions. The problem is that their upkeep is not so cheap. So while you may be spending less money up front, long term, you're actually going to end up spending a lot more money. And that means limitations on how many armies you can have running around. Furthermore, some units require another building to recruit. So for instance, without an army, you cannot get steam tanks, demigryphs, or greatswords, all of which are pretty damn important units. On top of that, the Empire is actually pretty bad at sieges, because to be effective in sieges, you either need to have some really good infantry units or monstrous infantry units that you can just take down a gate or multiple gates and just storm through the walls and kill everything in sight. The Empire doesn't have that option. Or you need to have incredibly powerful and easily accessible artillery that can knock down the walls. The Empire doesn't have that either, because their cannons, the unit that does this, that does knock walls and wall towers, crucially, is a tier 4 unit. So their ability to take over settlements is pretty bad overall. So you're gonna have some really miserable times in siege battles because of that. And overall, any Imperial campaign is going to be really rough, early on especially, because the early game units from the barracks, until you get to tier 3, your units are just plainly fucking horrible. All of them. They're either too expensive in the upkeep. Actually, they are too expensive in the upkeep for the value they have to offer. Because when you're looking at these units, oh, they're cheap to recruit. Yeah, but look at these guys. The crossbowmen are 120 upkeep. The halberdiers are 140 almost. And by the way, halberdiers are pretty damn worthless. And all of these are very low armor units that don't really have anything special going for them. I mean, the crossbowmen are pretty decent armor piercing, but not special units. It's only at tier 3 with huntsmen, greatswords, and handgunners that things do change in a great way. I mean, I would not necessarily use handgunners because of issues with gunpowder units, but huntsmen, yeah, they're pretty good, effective units. They are costly, though, very costly in terms of the upkeep. So the Empire does have some late game potential, or actually quite a bit of late game potential, but the early game does suck. It's not quite as dire as the Ogres when it comes to it, but it's still a really rough situation that you will have to deal with if you are playing an Imperial campaign over here. Because, yeah, just the units you have access to, their combat effectiveness and their cost is not going to be great. And it's not like the Empire has an easy situation in any of their campaigns, with the exception of Marcus Wolfhard. As Gelt, you have to deal with Vlad. As Karl Franz, you have to deal with Festus, then Vlad. As Volkmar, you have to deal with Manfred and potentially Cetra. That is not an easy. Those are not easy campaigns. Like, even some far more stronger races could struggle in these campaigns, and you certainly are not playing a strong race. And just throwing a race that's struggling, especially early on in these kind of campaigns, is not necessarily the best decision on creative assembly. And maybe that's something that needs to be rewarded. Like, if you want to have a race that starts weak but grows strong, fair enough, but give them the room to be able to do so. Don't just throw them into the middle of the fire and expect people to handle that, because it just leads to really miserable campaigns. The fourth race to talk about, the Dwarves, or rather the Dwarves, whatever. When it comes to the Dwarves, plenty of issues when it comes to their campaign mechanics, their racial mechanics. Let's actually talk about one of the more iconic ones, the grudge system, the great book of grudges and how it works. So in order to win a Dwarven campaign, you need to reduce the grudge severity to a fairly low level in order to achieve your long campaign victory condition. The problem with this is how grudges will work during the course of a campaign. The AI loves to raid and sack your settlements, or just outright take them over. The problem with that is that when a faction raids you, that will create a grudge. And the way that particular grudge works is you need to raid them or raid their race. So for instance, let's say the Bloody Spears raid my territory. Well, I won't get a grudge to raid the Bloody Spears specifically. Instead, I'll get a grudge to raid the Greenskins. Now, this can be annoying as all hell because it's a general grudge. So even if the Bloody Spears get wiped out, the grudge doesn't get removed, even though honestly it should, and it should be more specific to them. But rather, because it's such a general grudge, and this applies with many of the grudges that you will get throughout the campaign, it's like they're going to be general purpose against a particular race, as opposed to a particular faction or a particular lord, though sometimes you do get those as well, or rather you get against specific lords. But the problem with this is that you might end up in a situation where you don't have one of those races nearby to deal with, and thus removing that grudge, which will increase in severity throughout the campaign, can be a problem. For instance, it's quite possible you might not actually have any vampires to deal with, or Skaven after a certain point in the campaign. So it does become an issue, unless you're talking like some obscure faction on the very, very, very far side of the map of that particular race. So it can become a major issue to remove some of these grudges. And on top of that, just the system itself with the way it works, like, yeah, making a system that is supposed to, does fit within the race and how it works, but I just don't think the system works very well. On top of that, if you have a very low level, a very high level of grudge severity, you're going to lose a lot when it comes to diplomatic relations, research, control, and all you're really going to get are Slayers and charge bonus. It's not really a great system, it's not well designed, and it's also pretty buggy as well. So say for instance over here, right, I have a grudge to get the Master Rune of Spite, and what this requires me is to win 5 battles against the Crooked Moon, against Skarsnik. But imagine if Skarsnik gets wiped out before you fight 5 battles. And by the way, you absolutely can kill Skarsnik before that, because one of the things you can do is take the high place. Like, he takes the high place, you can get over there while he's still recovering, wipe him out, that's 1 battle, and then just immediately after take Mount Gunbad, or very quickly thereafter, without him being able to do anything about it, take Mount Gunbad, and that's 2 battles. You killed Skarsnik, but you failed the grudge, you didn't get the Master Rune of Spite. It's one of the problems with a lot of these kind of objectives. It is annoying as hell to try and do it. It's just a fundamental flaw in the game right now, trying to do these kind of objectives on the campaign map. Like, there's a lot of bugs. Forik has them, others have them with their grudges, but I think Forik is a big problem because he does have he should have a Confederation event with Karak Azul, but a lot of people, including myself, have experienced the issue where it just doesn't work, and so we end up being unable to confederate with them, which can create major issues during the course of your campaign when just some certain events don't work very well. So that's one big problem, the way the grudge system works. But that's just the top of the pile of crap that the dwarves have as a race. The other thing is that they have a very, very poor growth in their campaign. So for most races, the thing that matters the most when it comes to growth is how much growth your main settlement building generates. For the dwarves, even at the highest possible level, Karazakarak, which is a special settlement, would only generate 50 growth. And that's tier 5. At that point, you're finished, right? Until that, it generates significantly lower growth. And this is a special settlement. This is a special capital. And it does have a lot more growth than the regular dwarven settlements, which will generate far less. So dwarves growing their settlements is going to be slower with other factions. The bigger problem with that is that the dwarves, unlike many other races, do depend on actually getting high tier levels, not necessarily for the unit variety, but for the building variety, because the dwarves do need a lot of different types of buildings during the course of their campaign to really benefit from, like, just look at it from a military perspective, right? You want to get the siege workshop for artillery, you want to get your main barracks chain, though let's say you put that in a minor settlement. But, okay, you put that in a minor settlement, but for a provincial capital, you want the artillery chain, you want the halls of oaths, you want to get the armory, you want to get the ranger barracks potentially, but the ranger barracks requires the drinking hall in order to get Bugman's rangers. So you need, and yeah, you do need the hero capacity. So you need a bunch of different buildings. Now, the slots are there, but you need to be able to get those settlements to a high level to access them. And because of the poor growth, you're going to have an issue doing so. Now, people will say, well, all the units can be recruited from Tier 4. You don't really need Tier 5. That is not really a true settlement. It's not like Tier 5 doesn't give you anything, because it does give you more building slots, and it does give you certain buildings at Tier 5 which do have some benefits, like the hero recruit rank. But more crucially, it gives you those extra building slots, which you actually do need as the dwarves, because you do need to be able to recruit the different units, to be able to increase your hero capacity, so you can have more runesmiths, you can have more master engineers, you can have more thanes, and you can also have the economy. That's why having poor growth matters a great deal for the dwarves. It's the limited building slots, and it's not just at the very high level, it's on every level that this does impact them. Beyond that issue, there is a way to increase growth with dwarves, but there's 3 ways. You can either get the heavy cornerstones, which gives you a baseline growth benefit, or you can get autonomy of the holds, which improves the commandment. So you're reliant on controlling entire provinces to have decent growth, and it's not good, it's decent, to be clear. Or you can get this particular building chain here, but it's not, but you're taking up some of the valuable building slots that that the dwarves do need for a lot of other structures. And that's also another issue. The dwarves do have quite a bit of potential, but the problem for them is that they need to have so many different buildings to really unlock that potential. Let me explain why this is. Beyond just from a purely economic standpoint, right? You want to have the trinket maker just for the baseline income, but you also want to have the feast hall because it produces dwarven beer, which does sell for quite a bit from trade. So this improves your trade income. And then, of course, you want to have the guild marketplace because this increases the tradable resources faction-wide and income from all buildings in the local province. So you want to have all 3 of them, ideally, in a province. The more, the merrier. And then, yeah, the military situation also complicates things. So you need to have a lot of provinces, and each of those and to get these buildings in all of those buildings in those provinces, but growing individual provinces is slow. Just plainly very slow. Beyond that, dwarves do have a good army, but here's the problem with that great and glorious army. Dwarves have no way, absolutely, outside of Grombrindle, and it only applies for his army, although he can benefit you faction-wide, but dwarves have no way, with the exception of this building chain, and it's a growth building chain, it's not focused on casualty replenishment. They have no way of improving their casualty replenishment. They have no hero for it, and their baseline casualty replenishment is pretty terrible. So the problem is that you're going to be fighting a lot of manual battles, and the casualties you take are far more significant for you than for many other races. Like, as a greenskins, you don't give a crap if your army is down to 1/5 of its HP, because you can recover from that fairly easily. Or even if you do end up losing a lot of units, because again, you can recover from that situation. As the dwarves, you cannot so easily. Partly because the units themselves can be pretty expensive to recruit, and furthermore because you do have limited recruitment slots. Now, people will point out, well, the armory increases your local recruitment capacity by 1. It is a tier 3 building, so technically you can put it in every settlement, but in minor settlements you do need the economic buildings more so than increasing our local recruitment capacity. If you're playing a dwarven campaign, you just gotta accept the fact that it's going to take you a while, quite a bit of a long time, to be able to recruit a full stack of units. So every unit for the dwarves is more valuable. More lore accurate, sure, but an issue in the campaigns because it means recovering from any kind of mistake is going to be a lot harsher than in other races. The problem is the dwarves are just flat out outclassed by enemies, so all their enemies and all of the campaigns that they have. So therein lies the problem when it comes to that situation. They do have this nice benefit of getting artillery from tier 2, which is actually a substantial benefit. So they do well in sieges. I emphasize they do well in battles. That's not the issue. It's just the issue, the many issues in the campaign, like limited recruitment slots, that yes, you can improve them, but issues that come with doing that in the campaign. Their research tree is also very bloated, and a lot of it just feels pointless. Like, what's the point in having such a very vast research tree that the vast majority of the player base is not going to use even half of this? Because what you do, here's the thing, this whole thing, and this is one of the things that needs a rework. It might not seem harmful, and honestly, it's not really a downside, but it still just feels pointless. Here's what you do. If you're playing any Dwarven campaign, the first thing you do is you start researching High King Authority. You do stop it every turn because you do have a chance of getting a student and archivist, so you do have a great deal of research rate, but you do start getting High King Authority. Once you've gotten High King Authority, you could either go for the heavy cornstones if you so desire, or you can start improving your army at this particular point. Specifically, what you may want to get is ammunition wagons. And then, of course, all the things here. So, volley fire, superior black powder, and maybe even volatile volley. So you get all of this and all of this, right? That's what you'd get. After that, yeah, you should probably get heavy cornerstones for the extra growth. Okay, so these, this right here. And then, after that particular point, what you want to get is to go for Grimnir's favor, because that will give you some casualty replenishment rate, some local recruitment capacity, and even more local recruitment capacity. So that is how you play as the dwarves when it comes to the research tree. Everything else is fluff. Everything else is pretty pointless. Everything else is just like there to exist. That's the long and short of it. And even with what I just stated, there's some things that you really don't necessarily need. You don't even need the High King's Authority or even Oaths of Loyalty. All you really need is the autonomy of the holds, and, you know, maybe the Grand Throne Chamber, right, for the Lord Recruit rank. But everything else, a lot of this research is just fluff and pointless, and really should be reworked. And another thing that should be reworked is going to be the Forge. Now, people will say, oh, the dwarves are strong because they can get a lot of powerful items. Having a system like that is not really great. And yes, this system should be changed to not be so abusable. Now, it is a strength, don't get me wrong, but it is just a bad system because you're going to make a lot of items. What you do is you get like 120, right? You get 120 of gold. You make 4 of these hammers. You then combine them into green items, and then you try, and then you might combine those green items if you're lucky, or you might just recycle them, get it back, start over, get more of gold, get more of gold, get more of gold, infinite of gold glitch. That is not a great system. That should be changed as well. And just in general, like, this crafting system, like a lot of the things that you actually craft directly, like, to be honest with you, I'll be quite blunt about it, a lot of the items that are here are not really that great. I mean, there's some really good stuff in the runes, for instance, but actual items themselves, what you're actually better off doing when it comes to items is just combining them over here through the character screen, combining like a green weapon with a green weapon, or just green items in general at the same time to maybe, you know, get something like an Armor of Destiny or something like that, because those are the kind of items you want. You don't necessarily want to get a lot of the things that are actually here. I mean, some of the things you do want, don't get me wrong, there are absolutely some things that are valuable, specifically the Old Guard's Tankard. That is certainly a very, very valuable item because it gives you HP regeneration for combatants. So there are some useful things, but many of them are not really that great. The vast majority of the items that you can craft here are just simply not that great to actually make over here. Those are some of the issues with the dwarves, and they also have substantial enemies to deal with, so the limitations they have really do hurt them in their campaigns. I also think it should be pointed out, like, you consider the recruitment situation, and you consider the limited building slots, right? The reason this hurts the dwarves in particular, because they're not necessarily the only race that has limited, recruitment slots, right? But the reason the dwarves suffer the most from it is because pretty much every single one of their campaigns has them dealing, or all of their campaigns has them dealing with enemies that can just flat out out-recruit them. Like, every greenskin can get free full stacks very, very quickly in their campaigns, or 2 full stacks, 3 stacks very quickly, because of the AI cheats that give them recruitment slots, and because of the greenskin's baseline benefit in getting local recruitment capacity for every settlement they gain. Same with Skaven. Same situation with Skaven. Let's not even talk about Dark Elves and the situation Grombrindal has to deal with. He's the exception, by the way, because every other Dwarf Legendary Lord has to deal with greenskins and Skaven. Grombrindal doesn't, but he has to deal with the masses of Dark Elves and Warriors of Chaos. So therein lies the issue. It's not just that the dwarves are so horrible or they have these issues, but when you're dealing with races that just can flat out recruit, like if you're playing a Skarsnik campaign, you just throw 3 stacks at Forgrim or 2 full stacks at Forgrim. It doesn't matter how you play, you can just auto-resolve your way to victory. Whereas as Forgrim, if you're going to fight Skarsnik, or rather if you're going to play a campaign as Forgrim, Skarsnik won't necessarily be an issue. He's a pathetic wimp. But dealing with Warzag and dealing with the Skaven and the campaign situation is an absolute nightmare. And actually, every Dwarven campaign kind of feels like that, an absolute nightmare and a tedium because of the campaign mechanics. Now, the final race to talk about here is, of course, Kislev. Kislev is what happens when you take a weak race and you throw them against many far more powerful races, be it the Skaven, even the Norscans, because while the Norscans have a lot of issues in their campaign, one of the things that I would say does characterize the Norscans in every early campaign is they actually have a lot of early game power in the hands of the AI in particular. Lots of recruitment capacity, growth, economy, like, oh yeah, all the issues you have as Norsca, yeah, let's just hand wave them away when it comes to the AI. Wonderful situation, really. So Kislev has a lot on their plate, and they don't have good mechanics. In fact, their mechanics work against them, believe it or not. So one of the main things you're going to have to deal with as Kislev in every campaign is the invocations. The reason you care about invocations is because you need the supporters. The supporters give you faction-wide benefits that you do need. And also to win your campaign as Kislev, if you're playing as Catherine or Castaleton, you do need to get 600 supporters to confederate other. It's part of your short campaign victory condition. It screws you over, by the way, because getting 600 supporters is a ridiculous amount that takes dozens of turns. So it's a very slow campaign. Here's the problem with this particular system. The way the invocations work is you need devotion. But devotion is also used for other things as well. It's also used for the special structures in Kislev, which are really powerful and give you significant faction-wide benefits or local benefits. The issue is the devotion cost of invocation grows the more regions you control. These are like rights. Rights don't grow in cost the more regions you control, but Kislev invocations, for whatever stupid asinine reason, do. That's just really bad design. If anything should be changed, it's the fact that invocations should always be the same price. But on top of that, invocations can only be done with devotion that's gained from fighting chaos, be it Norsca, Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos. Well, that means other enemies you fight in the campaign, be it Skaven, Wood Elves, like Draco over here, Greenskins under Azag, they don't give you devotion. So you're not getting more towards invocations that already are going to grow in cost the more you play. Yes, a mod fixes it. I recommend you use it if you're playing any Kislev campaign, but it's still a major problem when it comes down to it, because devotion is important. It's important to be able to increase your hero capacity, because devotion is also used for the churches that give you the patriarchs. They're also used for certain research. So devotion is an important resource to have in your campaign, and the way you gain it is just bad. The way the mechanics of supporters are handled is pretty bad. I gotta say, I played a Total War Saga Troy, because this system of supporters, basically the Hector Paris system from a Total War Saga Troy. I never felt like, outside of your brother, be it Paris or Hector, when they were controlled by the AI, gaining a ridiculous advantage in like early on, I never felt frustrated by that system outside the AI cheating about it. Here the AI cheats, but the way the system is just bad, really, really bad. The difference is that there you gain support. You gain support or Priam's favor by doing actions that would actually benefit your campaign, right? Here, you gain supporters by invoking one of the gods or by maintaining churches. So the actual actions required to gain supporters are not great. You either invoke one god, specifically what you want to do really in a campaign is invoke Urson and capture a lot of territory. That's the best way, nothing else compares. Everything else is secondary and unimportant compared to that. The problem that you end up having during the course of a Kislev campaign is really the fact that this system is just boring to deal with. It just feels pointless, and it limits your ability to take the city the other faction have. Unless you're playing as Boris Ursus, who can just fly out confederate or declare war on the other factions and doesn't have to care at all about the supporter system. I mean, he can interact with it, sure, he can benefit from it, but he doesn't actually have to care about it. If you're playing Catherine Gorstalten, you do have to care about it. You can't declare war on the other faction like Catherine, and can't declare war on Gorstalten, vice versa. And you also can't confederate until you've gotten to the 600 supporters. So similar to the electoral count system or imperial authority system, which does limit your campaign options. So that's one of the main issues. Beyond that, the geography of Kislev is absolutely terrible. A lot of these regions are minor settlement regions only. So Western Troll Country and Eastern Oblast, as well as the South, are insignificant regions, because Kislev actually doesn't benefit from having regions or provinces without a proper provincial capital. They benefit a lot from a proper provincial capital, and they benefit a lot from the cities, not from an economic standpoint, but more from the special structures they generate and unit recruitment. But they benefit economically a lot from a provincial capital, because the main building, their main economic building, outside of the special cities, at Tier 4 and Tier 5 provides a benefit to tradable resources in that province. So for Kislev, what they really want to do, they really want the imperial provinces as opposed to the Kislevite provinces, which are just plainly terrible to actually have to deal with. And on top of that, another issue in their campaigns, it's very easy in playing a Kislev campaign to end up in a constant combat loop where you're fighting a campaign and you're making absolutely no progress. My advice if you're playing a Kislev campaign is try and avoid that, try and get the hell out of that situation, because what you want to do is, yes, you want to stabilize the north and then you want to go conquer the south, specifically towards Sylvania. If you have any moral issues with declaring war on the empire, just go for Sylvania, wipe out Vlad, take over the gold mine, take over the territory there, then conquer the dwarves. That just feels better than fighting the empire, I suppose. Because their territory is also valuable for you. But your campaign just doesn't feel like what the Kislev campaign should be about. Because Kislev should be about fighting chaos. That's their purpose in the lore. But instead, you don't benefit at all from doing that. You end up in a hellhole doing that. And your empire can't grow because a lot of the northern, a lot of the Norscan territory is chaos climate, a chaotic wasteland. So you're not going to benefit from taking over it. In fact, trying to take over it and trying to hold it would be a significant downside. Yes, Krakadrak and the Ice-Toothed Mountains, and of course the Trollheim Mountains, those can be beneficial. But a lot of the territory of Norsca and chaos wastelands, it's not a great idea to try and conquer that. And even as Boris Ursus, like my campaign idea for Boris Ursus is basically not play his campaign, because his campaign should be a Chaos Wasteland campaign. But that's the worst kind of decision you can make as Boris Ursus. So that's the thing about Kislev, is like you're kind of really going against the spirit of all their campaigns and going against the spirit of the lore. And so that's one of the things I would say needs to be redesigned. Like, as much of a problem as the Wood Elves have in their campaign feeling boring, I feel their campaigns, like, no one complains about their campaign style not fitting the lore. In fact, it fits the lore very well, and it was actually a bigger issue, I would argue, how their campaign style was before their rework, a far bigger issue. I just wish their campaigns were more exciting. But what I think is Kislev needs a campaign that's more similar to that than the aggressive expansionist campaign that they currently have, which doesn't work well for them thematically. Because if you want to play a human faction, play the Empire for all their issues. It just feels better. Like, it's something... I don't feel like I'm playing as Kislev even when I'm playing a successful campaign, because I'm not playing as Kislev, I'm just basically playing an Imperial campaign in all but name. That's another one of their issues, because in order to succeed as a Kislev campaign, you do need to take territory to the south of Kislev. You do need to expand in territory of the Empire, Sylvania, the Greenskins, maybe even the Dwarves. Like, there's some great territory that Dwarves do have, like Zufbar can be pretty good, Blackwater, or the Southern Grey Mountains. Like, if you could conquer the entire Empire, or even the entire Empire, Bretonia, Estalia, Tylea, while doing the minimal required in the north, that would be great. You have a lot of campaign options at Kislev, but is it really Kislev at that point? That's my issue when it comes to their campaign. On top of that, their economy can be pretty limited early game, so a lot of the units that they do have, you won't be able to get access to. Their roster can also feel pretty annoying. They do have some good choices later on, but they do have one major issue. And this is actually one they share with the Empire. They don't have a good, successful way of winning sieges. Now, you can obviously bring multiple armies and out-resolve it, and then there's various cheese methods. But they don't have the units. Even armor Kossars are not capable of just storming the gates of the settlement, because they're decent, they're not great. If you try and just break through the wall, the gates with them and storm through those gates, you're going to get slaughtered in many situations. You need artillery to break down the walls, but that artillery is only available at tier 4 if you're playing as Kislev. So plenty of issues when it comes down to their design from that perspective. Now, Kislev does have some great army choices. Their regular Kossars can be effective in battle, though they are a bit more expensive than they should be in both recruitment and upkeep. They are a bit too expensive compared to the actual benefits. That's because they're a hybrid unit, so because they're decent in melee, though they're not really that great in melee because they have low armor and not that great stats. But they're decent, so they cost more or being decent in melee, and that's not really a trade-off, and that's not really what you want to do with Kossars. You don't want to use them as a melee unit. That's just a waste of the unit. You want to use them as a ranged firepower unit. That's the best way to do so. The hybrid unit aspect was made because Kislev was supposed to be a tutorial race, a beginner's race, and, well, let's just say mission completely and utterly failed when it came to that. And that's one of the things maybe they should look to change, because there's a lot of things that when you look at Kislev and you see where Creative Assembly took the steps to make this more friendly towards new players, but they just fell flat on their face when it came to design. Maybe that's something they should rework or rework the race completely in order to actually make it a recommended first campaign, which is what they were meant to be. Now, a Kislev campaign is perfectly playable, and I will be honest, I actually prefer playing Kislev in a lot of ways more than the Empire. Simply because, while yes, you don't have the Demigryphs and you don't have the Hellstorm rocket batteries, you do have Tsar Guard, you do have the Snow Leopards, you do have the War Bear Cavalry, and the Ice Guard. You do have some really good choices, and really the chariots, the war sleds. It's really the war sleds that make things interesting. Skirmishing units that pack a heavy punch in melee as well, like because they're being pulled by murderous polar bears. So Kislev does have some options, but their campaign just really feels weird and bad in a lot of ways as well. Anyway, that's all there is to say. Costin signing out, and I'll see you boys and girls next time. And do listen to what Karl Franz and Lufer Harkon had to say.